Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore. Today we are joined by Jean Lacy and Representative Ford from Illinois. How are you both doing today?
Good, thanks.
I'm doing good, Joe. Thank you for having me.
Very excited to talk about this novel psychedelic project happening in Illinois, and also how this is a grassroots project where, Jean, you were doing some advocacy work and educated lawmakers to make this kind of progress. So, could you set the stage for us, Jean, about where this interest kind of came from and how you started approaching lawmakers?
Yeah, so we formed the Illinois Psychedelic Society, late 2020. We're in the pandemic and realized that, we really needed to start building community around the topic of psychedelics right here in Illinois. It's a popular phrase in the space to find the others, and that's really was what we set out to do. And started hosting online meetings and gathering people and just starting to have the conversation about what we really wanted. This movement to look like right here in Illinois and responding to the needs and requests of the community. And one of the things that we quickly realized was the need to get involved in policy and the need to start educating our lawmakers who, just a few years ago were still largely in the dark about the topic of psychedelics and didn't really have an understanding of how the community was engaging in them and also, the things that were coming down the pipeline. So fortunately, I think it didn't take us long to get connected to Representative Ford, and we were fortunate that he quickly, heard what we were saying, took interest in it, and was willing to, have a lot of early conversations and get educated in a really in-depth way to put together, what is now known as the Illinois Cure Act, but had a few different iterations back then because we really just wanted to try and put our best foot forward of what we think psychedelic policy can look like in Illinois that actually meets the needs of the community while also, giving that like public safety lens and making sure that we were just like putting the mechanisms in place of something that we actually thought could work. So, even since then, and some of those early drafts, we've continued to engage with various stakeholders from, experts in the community to people doing policy work all across the country, sometimes in other countries, and, the state departments right here in Illinois that are actually going to be working to regulate this thing and taking the time to have those conversations and say what's going to work for you to implement this so that we can actually get that much further in get that much closer into actually accomplishing this. So like you said, Joe, this has been a really grassroots movement. This has been something that's come from the community and is, I honestly can't thank Rep Ford enough for being willing to like be the first one out there and be our champion and put his face on an initiative like this. Regardless of the politics of it, he was willing to step out and say like, no, this matters to the community, and this is something that we see that's actually helping people. And he took the time to listen to the stories from moms like me, from veterans, from people in the community that said, hey, like this is why this matters to me. So that's really how we got this going. And then I will, pass it off to Rep Ford so he can talk a little bit about like what it's been like educating actually within the legislature and talking to his colleagues.
All right, Rep Ford, this must have been a little perplexing when somebody said legalize psychedelics. You're like, what? like, how did that go for you?
You know, First of all, I want to thank Jean Lacy and the Illinois Psychedelic Society for understanding the process and being willing to do the work. It's like a model for how government should work. I mean, you have to be willing to do the work and build the tent out and make it a tent of understanding, and that's what this has been about, making sure that the myths about psychedelics will become better understood, that they're myths, and teaching the realities. And so it's always good to work with people that's willing to do the work, like Gene and the society, and Senator Ventura, that's just been a real partner in this in the Senate. So they've been able to get the attention, and that's huge, Joe, to um, just get the attention of members of the Republicans and the Democrats in the General Assembly. And so, for me as a member, being able to work with constituents, being able to work with the people of Illinois to change public policy for health benefits, public safety, and for the well-being of the state is why I'm there. And so I congratulate Gene and the society for understanding how to get things done for the good of people by taking it to the state house and using best practices from across the nation to bring it to Illinois to try to have the best law that Illinois could have for the good of people.
Mhm. I think I'll add to that, if I can. It's really been a slow and steady wins the race kind of process. I think that our first year was really just a matter of introducing the concept to so many people who really were just totally clueless. And then in the second year we had kind of laid some of that foundation, and we picked up sponsors like Senator Ventura, who really was able to do a lot of legwork in educating her colleagues in the Senate side. And it even led to a subject matter hearing in the Senate Executive Committee this spring, which was a phenomenal opportunity for us to gather some of like the best stories and the best experts from our community and say, we are all constituents of Illinois and are in this space and have been immersed in this. And this is what, we really believe is the common sense way for Illinois to go about this. So after that, it really just like catalyzed our movement and allowed us to get the attention of leadership in the Senate and the House side, and really allowed us to keep the momentum going to where we think that we really it's an inevitability that this bill will pass. It's really just a matter of time and getting the right people on the train, and we were able to make tremendous progress with that this year.
Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what the bill is? Like, what are we asking for?
Yeah. I'll start and just say that the idea was when we first drafted this bill, they heard really only Oregon had passed their psilocybin services act. The Natural Medicine Health Act was still like really being discussed and labored over in terms of what that language was going to read. So we were taking a lot of policy from across the country that was still even in draft form. That we were it's still a tight knit community of psychedelic policy people, and everybody's still really willing to share information and try to figure out the best pathway. So we were fortunate to have those connections and be able to use those as an idea of what it could look like. So we knew we wanted to go with the service center model, similar to what they were doing in Oregon, and we wanted to do it in a way that could fit into our Illinois regulatory framework. So similar to Oregon, we're creating 4 license types related to manufacturing, testing, service centers, and facilitators. What the details of those licenses look like, some of them have been laid out, testing requirements have been laid out, but a lot of that, like Oregon, will be played out in the rulemaking process where we can actually put the advisory board that we're creating under the act to use and, gather all these experts and say like, okay, what are your recommendations? The hope is that, similar to Oregon, the rulemaking process can heavily involve advocacy groups and the public, and that everybody has a chance to have a voice and contribute to what this program could look like once it gets online. And then the other aspect of the Cure Act that I think is really important is removing psilocybin and psilocin from the list of controlled substances only in Illinois. Obviously, we can't effectuate federal policy there, but it's still, we believe that by by doing that, we can open up opportunities for partnerships between state research institutions and these service centers and really start to create a stronger, more cohesive ecosystem so that there's a better continuity of care between people who are engaging in their everyday healthcare services and these psilocybin services, because we really want to remove any roadblocks between the medical community and this psilocybin services program, even though facilitators, as the language is written, they're not required to be a clinician. They are required to have some kind of previous mental health training, even if it's as simple as a community behavioral health services certificate, just that foundational, yes, I have worked with people in mental health situations and I have that foundation of knowledge. So I know I rambled on a little bit, but I think that that's the foundation of what we're trying to accomplish with the Cure Act, is getting those services online, creating that closed loop regulatory system, and then making sure that we are creating the most cohesive psychedelic ecosystem that is possible with this policy in Illinois, and not just compartmentalizing.
That's beautiful. Um, Rep Ford, what constituencies have you seen most interested in this kind of bill?
Joe, we've seen veterans being the number one constituents that have actually helped lead this discussion. Athletes have helped lead the discussion, and people that actually experience trauma just from living their life and their experiences. So it's really a people led and the people need movement, and that's what makes it different. I mean, it's bigger than I ever thought it would be, and I really haven't seen objections to the idea. What I see from the work that the society is doing, people want to do this. They just want to get it right, and they want to make sure that Illinois don't make the mistakes that we made when we legalized cannabis, and they want to make sure that um, everyone has access to the treatment. Meaning, um, you don't want it to be something that only those that have the means to have the treatment. So, and that's one of the focuses that Gene and the society has been working on, making sure that there's equity, not only in being able to have access to it, but also having equity in being in the business. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
why it takes so much effort to get it right, because you have to bring all the people to the table. And I think that it's working.
We're at an interesting point. We're 10 years after Colorado legalized cannabis. A lot of other states have legalized since then, and we've learned a lot from all of that. Rep Ford, can you kind of like chat a little bit about what was disappointing in the cannabis world in Illinois, particularly?
Equity as far as ownership and the ability to be in the business, cash only. And so that was difficult, not being able to have those people that were impacted by the quote war on drugs be um, available for, business licenses, or not being able to. They were available, but they just didn't have the resources to be business owners. And so making it possible is one of the things that we learned from cannabis, that we can't go down that path. So we learned that it has to be possible for people to get into this business. On the front, we knew on the front end that it was going to be impossible for those that were hardest hit by the war on drugs to be able to be owners and operators in the business. And we are aware of that as we move forward in this endeavor.
Yeah, bad federal policy radically impacting the state's ability to operate in a good way for everybody. It's a big deal. Um, And I hope we can resolve that. I believe Illinois was definitely disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, and I hope we can dig our way out of that. And I'm seeing hints of that. New York suggested they were going to try to do a little bit better. I don't think New York executed all that well, around cannabis particularly. But I think it's trying to improve. Everywhere's trying to improve and do better. So thanks for your leadership on that around trying to get people who are impacted by the war on drugs more involved in this. It's really important. Who else has more experience? It's nice to include physicians, but physicians are quite new to this territory, largely speaking. Jean, anything you'd like to add on this topic?
Yeah, I think that the Rep Ford mentioned that the importance of having this conversation up front. And I think that that's something that we have learned on the advocacy end from cannabis too, is, we knew that we had to heavily focus on the medicinal benefits in order to pass, our first push for cannabis legalization. But I think that from that we learned that it's really important to have those deeper conversations about equity and inclusion in an industry right out of the gate as you're continuing to talk about those medical benefits, which are important political talking points. The ability for people to operate in this space, and it goes deeper than ownership. I was fortunate enough to be a part of a team that conducted a statewide disparity study on the cannabis industry, and we saw that the social equity provisions in cannabis really did result in really fantastic diversity in ownership. Unlike that, you don't see that kind of diversity in ownership in any other industry, and that's true. But there's more to the conversation when you're talking about people who were disproportionately impacted by prohibition, already being kind of a step behind in terms of being able to raise capital and get the resources that they actually needed to get their businesses off the ground to a point of profitability. So I think that there's a lot of work to do in that arena still. But I think that we're learning so many of those lessons of, having those conversations before we pass our first round of policy on this issue, and saying like what does that equity and inclusion look like when it comes to a psychedelic services model. And it's not going to look the same like it does for cannabis, but the fact that we're even having those conversations up front as opposed to after the fact, I think is progress and a sign of what we've learned from the legalization of cannabis, and the bifurcation of cannabis too, I think is something that we can kind of evolve from. It's not necessarily only medical versus recreational. There's hundreds of reasons why people use substances, and it doesn't matter what substance you pick, they're pretty much all the same. Also having that conversation up front, I think, is a really strong learning point from the cannabis space, is that, hey, it's not always just this black and white medical versus recreational use. We really need to open up our idea of why people engage in these substances anyways, and it doesn't always look like sickness or health.
Yeah, absolutely. There's two aspects that I want to dig into, but there's this concept of first mover advantage, and a lot of people think that's going to really help. Oregon really rushed and could have taken a little bit more time and given the project a little bit more resources. There's a lack of interest in investment in Oregon as a result. There's two areas that you could probably be informed by. There's one around, I believe a number of attorneys are now suing the state of Oregon around American Disabilities Act access. So say somebody's closer to end of life, they can, I believe Colorado is actually supporting in-home use now in the regulated framework. And this expands access substantially to people who just can't leave their homes because they're ill. There's an extension on this that Colorado did not get right, in my opinion, where I think it excludes some people with assorted stomach cancers or esophageal cancers where they can't actually swallow things. And I don't know that that's right, but it's just the way it is right now. And that's a big one for me. So like extractions, for instance, or other routes of administration beyond oral would be really helpful to include for accessibility and inclusivity. And then there was another one around religious use. Um, Gene, as you probably know, there's a robust religious use scene in Detroit, where people are bringing and reviving interesting traditions from Africa for their use. And I think figuring out a way to allow for people to practice religion the way they want to is really good. It's quite American, I think, best I can tell. But yeah, it's a little complicated these days. So I don't know. Any thoughts on those two? Quick comments on those two items, religious or accessibility?
Well, I would tell you that, first of all, the job of the government is not to be a barrier for freedoms.
Oh,
And, and so that's why this is clearly necessary. Uh, and I think that we have to make sure that if we're going to be a blue state and we talk about freedoms and democracy, that people have the rights that they know work for them and that has proven to work for them.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that the first thoughts that come up for me is that the first mover's advantage is one thing, but I think that there's some really key advantages to being third or fourth or fifth because we're going through our process of negotiating the terms of this bill while they're also like publishing their data and learning from things that got left out like the accessibility, and I think that that's like just a huge advantage for us. Um, we are I think that good or bad, we're the first state that's really, gotten this far in terms of doing this legislatively. So it's quite a bit different running a legislative campaign than it is for a ballot measure like they did in Colorado and Oregon. So again, like, we're trying to do what's best for the community that's really pushing for this, but also make it to where it can go through that it can make it through that legislative process at the same time. So I think that the accessibility issue is a big one. That was something that actually came up in early conversations with our lawmakers of, what are we doing about accessibility? And in our most recent versions of the bill, we've been able to include some provisions where, like situations where people can't leave their house can be covered as long as the facilitator, has a certain level of licensure, which I thought was really helpful. I am definitely very aware of the religious youth scene, not just in our neighboring Michigan, but also it's all over, and it's here in Illinois too. Here in Illinois, we have really strong religious freedoms. We have a really strong RIFRA, so people are able to, like Ford said, not have their freedoms kind of imposed on when they're doing things like safely and in a way that's respectful to the people who are participating. So I we talked about this a little bit ahead of time, Joe, but I'm a big fan of as many points of access as possible in ways that are, people have total informed consent and they're able to have that safety. And I think accountability is another really key point in a lot of those circles. There are harms that can happen when people consume substances and come into these vulnerable states. So I would really like to see, at least here in Illinois, that we're launching a program to where even if people with more religious focused practices want to participate in this program, that there's a pathway for them to do so so that they can participate in tested substances, a system of accountability, and a program that really allows people to know what they're getting themselves into, and have that process of being licensed by the state to where they know that if any harm comes to them, that there are repercussions for that. So I think that there are a lot of people in the religious youth scene that are doing really phenomenal work and changing lives for the better. I really hope that our regulatory systems can be inclusive of their work too.
agreed.
I
Yeah, I
would
know
tell
we
you,
keep.
since I'm sorry, Joe, but we should definitely give a lot of credit to our regulatory um, systems because they've been at the table listening, and I think that's the advantage that the society, Gene and society, has had the um, foresight to make sure that everyone's at the table with the administration, the governor's administration, because we're able to, whether the governor's administration and his team supports it or not, I think that what we've been able to do is ask them to the table to help us write legislation that could be implemented, um, even if they're not in support of it, because there's what you call a system of checks and balances. We want the governor's office to support it, want the governor to support it, but sometimes that may not be possible. And we got a legislature. That's how we have a system of checks and balances, and we could pass it with or without the governor's support. But we need their input because we're in it together. So they've been at the table and given their input so that if the law passes, because there are enough members in the General Assembly in both House and the Senate, we could pass good public policy that one, the governor could sign or he could veto and we could override it. Nevertheless, we're going to have the regulators constantly helping us have good policy that may become the law of the land.
Mm, I love that. And I love this idea of accountability that you were chatting about too, because there's so many stories from these we call them underground operators, and it's because there's shadows, because of poor policy. People are getting away with hurting people in ways that is not great, and we can do a lot better as a society here. And this is one of the major reasons I'm so excited, largely around legalization measures like this, because people can be kept safer because they don't have to hide. How many people go to the cops and say, hey, this happened? They say, oh, mushrooms were involved. Don't care. See you later. And like, that's really tragic, and something that we need to work towards stopping. And I think any effort to bring this stuff to the light is great. And Rep. Ford, yeah, being really broad and getting having a target on having a governor's support is really important. And I love that, because it seems like there is this becomes bipartisan in a way. And is Illinois largely a blue state?
Well, I have a different perspective because I live in the not Chicago part of Illinois. So I think if you were to ask someone from, the Chicagoland area, they might say, "Oh yeah," and I think that certainly optically our politics can look that way. But I will say, as an advocate, my experience in Springfield is that you really need that bipartisan support to move stuff, and it's really important. And then there's a different kind of advantage that comes with having bipartisan support. So that's one of the reasons why we worked so hard to get it for this bill, because we knew, speaking of getting the governor's support, it's a lot harder for the governor to not support something that's a bipartisan initiative. So it was really important for us to, yes, this started with a Democratic representative. Our first key sponsor in the Senate is also a progressive Democrat. But it was high on our priority list to get bipartisan support. We were really fortunate to work with Senator Craig Wilcox, who's also from a not Chicago part of Illinois. He's from McHenry County, and he was phenomenal. He's a veteran himself, and so he really connected to this issue in a way that was meaningful to him, and sat down with us and again took the time to get educated. I was impressed with how many YouTube videos he was able to watch in between our meetings, but he really took the time to get interested in this issue and what it really meant to sign on to our bill. And then he ended up wholeheartedly jumping behind the Cure Act and being supportive of the work that we're trying to do, which has been phenomenal. So yeah, I think it's a trickier question, and I think that one of the things that came up for me when you were talking, Joe, was that in the Cure Act, there's a very small tax that will be applied to the sale of psilocybin, just like in any other state. But in Illinois, that money is set aside to specifically educate first responders and law enforcement with it, just general harm reduction education, but that's really important, especially when you think of the rural places like where I live, where the sheriffs and the elected officials here are a lot more conservative, and they need that same base level of education so that it's just as safe for somebody to have a service center here than it is in a Chicago municipality where the politics are a little bit more progressive.
You've done a good job because one, yes, Illinois is a blue state, but Jean nailed it when she says, yet parts of Illinois is red. And so, yeah, nationally, we are going to elect or vote for probably a Democrat for president. But when you start digging into local state policies, we have Republicans and Democrats that make the decision about what's going to be voted on, what's going to pass. And so you need a bipartisan approach. And let me just say, we want the governor's support, but also the governor, he's still a friend to me and to the cause. And sometimes the governor, he may be able to support it or not. And I'm pretty understanding of everyone's politics. And that's one of the things that, Joe, we have to worry about. Politics getting in the way of what's good for people. Some people, whether Republican or Democrat, um, probably would never be able to vote for this simply because of politics.
Mm, mm. And what's interesting to me about this psychedelic topic is specifically lately how bipartisan it feels. And we're seeing a lot of action in Florida. We're seeing a lot of action in Texas, um, including, I believe, a substantial amount of state funds going towards research, which is great. And their biggest, or at least most popular hospital, UT Austin, I believe, is doing a lot of really interesting research, which I love. And, um, you know, Texas gets a lot of headlines because it just doesn't seem like the place you would be seeing this research. But because of the athlete topic, I'm sure you are all familiar with our friend Daniel Carcillo, NHL. Yeah, so he's lovely on the athlete topic, and then there's so many interesting veterans floating around as well. So we're hitting so many things. Like, I think between the athletes, veterans, and moms, like it's hard for it not to be a bipartisan topic. And it's very similar to what I was seeing when I was doing a little bit of lobbying in D.C. with the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition when we were talking to congressmen staffers, congressional staffers. Minimal objection. We're coming forward talking about the constituencies interested and then the data. And it was not a very hard sell for them to be interested in this topic and likely support things we would propose. So I'm loving seeing this action here, and thank you all for kind of playing it out in real time in your state.
Yeah, I think that that's been similar to my experience. Shout out to the staffers in Springfield because there are some really awesome people who are working as staffers in Springfield, and yeah, without them being, willing to listen to this issue, it's a lot harder to get the attention of the lawmakers. So yeah, like presenting them with that little bit of data and getting, them like, at least intrigued of like, yes, let's talk more about this has been really key. And then obviously they're also, I don't know that people even realize, but they also end up being a huge part of a lot of conversations as they're the ones doing the drafting and helping making sure that we're not crossing with this other bill or that other bill, and doing all that research work for us. So yeah, very undervalued set of people there that have been an important part of this movement.
That's interesting. So what kind of advisors have you all been pulling from? I assume there's some researchers, clinicians, underground folks that have been supporting you. Is there anybody you can name?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, I think in terms of the larger psychedelic movement and like big names that people would recognize, I joke like, oh, people are still sleeping on the Midwest. They're still so focused on things that are going on the coast. But the truth is that I don't think that anybody that we've actually sat down and had a conversation with has been not supportive. There's been a few, like things that we would see, the American Psychiatric Association like came out and opposed, and that created some challenges for us. But there is a plethora of, I shouldn't say plethora, that's probably an exaggeration, but there's a lot of psychiatrists who do support this and who are behind on the research. So it was, I think that the secret sauce to our campaign has been engaging with those local experts and the people who are right here in the Midwest to say, like, hey, like, I'm here, born and raised, been here most of my life, and this is, my expertise and how I want to contribute to this movement. So I think that that's really been the key. Like I said, on a national scale and even on a global scale, still, I feel like the psychedelic policy community is still pretty small, and honestly has been so supportive. Again, I've yet to be in one of those situations where people aren't like excited and willing to share information and really just like eager to keep the movement going and keep this policy evolving. So I'm definitely excited to see. I was grateful. That we had this opportunity to be on your podcast. Your platform's been, really instrumental, I feel like, in the psychedelic space and keeping everyone informed. So I hope that this opens up doors for even more conversations and more opportunities to get that broader support from, the larger psychedelic movement, and that they can say, hey, the movement's really happening in Illinois. This is a real thing that's going on. And I think that the more that we collaborate and share information, that, the better off that all of our different policies are going to be, no matter which route we're going about it.
Joe, what's amazing about this is I've been doing public policy as a member of the General Assembly, now at the House, for 18 years. There are more people that support this and that are waiting for Illinois to get this right. I can't you couldn't imagine how many people call and say, "We hope you pass that." People that you wouldn't even expect, lobbyists that lobby for the medical community, people that lobby for pharmaceutical. They're waiting for us to really pull this together because they're really not in opposition. What I think our biggest challenge is the myth of psychedelics and making sure that we get the message right. Because I know, Gene, you get people that you wouldn't even imagine calling you saying, one, this has helped people in my family. This is helping me. And I hope you guys pass it. It's really shocking because passing multiple, at least hundreds of public policies in my career, I don't think I've ever had a silent group of people that's waiting to come out and say we need to pass this. It's big, bigger than we know.
I think it's something that surprised me is the behavioral health community has really like rallied around this Illinois movement. We've been really fortunate we have a couple of very strong coalitions of behavioral health and counseling specialties that do a lot of advocacy work, and they've been huge in helping us as an organization navigate what it means to pass policy in Springfield, and giving us their input, and then also mobilizing their members and their community to rally when it's time to come do witness slips or sign a petition that we've got up on our website right now. They've been really instrumental in getting that information out and around, and really showing out a strong show of support for the Cure Act, and really just for the psychedelic movement at large. And it's a lot less about this is the way or no way. It's like Rob Ford keeps saying, it's much more about like, let's come together and all be a part of this conversation to get it right. And that's what I think again makes Illinois unique from other places, is that there's no outside organizations coming in and saying this is what this policy looks like. This is what the experts and the people who are passionate about this topic right here in Illinois, this is what we have come together and said that psychedelic policy can look like, if we continue this conversation.
But you know, Gene, when we think about legalization of marijuana, the money that was spent to advocate to pass it, w- you know, we probably could have eliminated homelessness in Illinois. And this group is small and yet powerful and able to do major work in order to bring this to the forefront and to have bills and hearings and have a meeting with the president of the Senate. Gene had that meeting with the president to get a hearing on a small budget. I don't know how much y'all got, but I know y'all don't have any money, and so I hope people understand that with a little money to help lobby this to get the message out will go a long way. I think that
Yeah.
we hope that they can continue to build funds to lobby.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think that because this has been a community-led initiative, one of the things that has been hugely valuable is that constituency engagement. What even got us the meeting with the Senate president is one of his constituents coming to him and sharing her story and being brave enough to say, I'm a retired public school teacher and I've lived my whole life in your district, and this is how psilocybin therapy saved my life. And her story was so profound and moving that he said, absolutely, yes, we want a hearing on this. And her story specifically needs to be shared to a wider audience. And it even gives me goosebumps telling that story, because I think that it's, again, such a beautiful representation of how democracy can work, and how, it and I again come from a rural part of the state where it is scary to go out into your community and tell these psychedelic stories, and not everyone is in a situation where they feel safe and comfortable to do that, and I respect that. But when you can, it really can make a huge difference, more than you can even think. And like that would be my, one call to action of all the things I can ask people to do. Obviously, make donations, sign our petition, get involved in our community. But really, the number one thing, whether you live in Illinois or somewhere else where a psychedelic policy is being discussed, talk to your elected officials. And even just sharing that story in a small one-on-one setting with them can really make a profound impact in these kinds of movements. So don't wait to ask for permission. Reach out to your elected official and say, hey, here's how this has impacted me or the people in my life. And this is how we've seen all the progress be able to be made in this, small grassroots movements without, millions of dollars in our bank account. We're able to actually make real progress and effectuate real change in Illinois. And it's been awesome to hold space for.
That's fantastic. Offhand, are these two clinicians, psychiatrist Matt Brown, Dr. Matt Brown, or Ville-Marie Narlock, are they involved at all?
Yeah, Matt Brown runs a group. I think you can still find them on a meetup. It's like Psychedelics in Psychiatry or Chicago something. Anyways, he's got a great group, and we definitely have a lot of crossover between our communities. So they, a lot of people from his group have been in the conversation and staying involved. And yes, Ville-Marie Narlock has been an ally and become a friend, has been a great human being to work with alongside of this. She was one of the first people that I tagged in to say, hey, let's get involved, because of all of her experience with SSDP and, running the drug education program there. She has phenomenal expertise. So she's been deeply involved in this. She runs a nonprofit clinic outside of Chicago called Sana Healing Collective. So she's also been able to give us a lot of like the practical perspective of like what this is actually going to look like to be like in that kind of setting with a diverse group of practitioners and kind of more of that blended model. So yeah, there's other people doing really phenomenal work in the Chicago area that have had that expertise, that have really lended, a, a huge helping hand to our movement.
You know, Joe, I have to say one thing that is surprising, and some may find it surprising, but law enforcement, they're under a lot of trauma and stress, and we know that this helps them. And we know for a fact that it's been stated by some people in law enforcement that this would be very helpful for their population as well. So it's real therapy for everyone. And yeah, so it's great that you build this up on your podcast.
Yeah, definitely
Yeah,
a
happy
shout
to.
out
I
to
was
Law Enforcement Action Partnership. They have been a huge help. Dave Franco is Chicago based, a former Chicago police officer, and he's been doing a ton of advocacy work on this issue to try and get the word out there and leveraging some of his personal story to get that done too. So I know he's been on a couple podcasts and done a few interviews and plugged our work, but the Law Enforcement Action Partnership as a group is doing phenomenal work to really bring that law enforcement perspective to ending the drug war.
was recently on stage with Leap's executive director,
She's so
Diane,
cool.
in Aspen. I was like, new best friend. Thank you for everything you've been doing for so long. Never thought I wanted to be friends with police, and then I was on stage with another police officer out of Boston, who's the first out Boston cop, Sarko, and he's doing, he's participated in MDMA trials. He's also a therapist as a police officer, and is working towards getting police included more in some of this. He had some really great arguments. I think you can listen to the recording on Aspen Public Radio's website. He's just such a compelling storyteller. And then he figured out a framework and got permission from his police chief and town manager to actually be practicing a psychedelic religion as a police officer, and which is fascinating to me, that he got like very explicit permission for things that are First Amendment protected allegedly, but just getting that permission is just a first of its kind thing. And he was on stage in Aspen as well in uniform. So first in uniform cop at a psychedelic conference sharing these stories. It was really impressive. So I hope police officers can learn from that. And yes, some of the arguments are around these people are very overworked. They're very stressed out. Old police culture, and this is probably the case in some jurisdictions where you could be at some really extreme call, car wreck or shooting or something, and then your chief is like, slap some water in your face and get back out there right away. And then that's not a really great psychological position to be in, to be making very sophisticated decisions that are life and death for themselves and others. And it's not great. And it doesn't breed really great thinking, critical thinking, and decisions, in my opinion. So if we can implement this stuff skillfully, one of my lines is, I can't wait to trust the police again. And this is something in that direction. And I'm really excited about that.
And we've taken the approach that the police are at the table helping write the public policy, because we need to know how they could best police if this becomes a reality, and when this becomes reality in the state. This process of making public policy also educates law enforcement in it as well. It would not be one of those laws that we thrust upon law enforcement. They're at the table from the beginning, which means that they are talking about it in their meetings as well and becoming more educated. The problem that we've had in the past with passing public policy, we expect for police to automatically um, conform when they don't know what they're conforming to. And so this is a great process of learning and teaching along the way.
That's great. Have you all been up to speed a little bit on what MAPS is doing with Denver in terms of educating law enforcement there? And they're also working on a statewide training platform. So I'm really excited about that. For what it's worth, shameless plug, we're primarily an education business. So if we can ever help educate any of your populations that need education, please feel free to use us as a resource. I would love to be educating police.
Yeah, for sure.
So what else is really interesting or topical for you all around this that we haven't maybe covered yet?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we really covered a lot of ground, and I'm just again grateful for the opportunity to, utilize your platform to talk about the awesome work that we've been doing. Really grateful to Representative Ford for his leadership, to Senator Ventura, to Senator Wilcox for just their willingness to educate themselves to be able to better educate their colleagues. Um, and I think that the really message I want to drive home is how important it is to get involved and the importance of that advocacy role in this whole bigger picture. And it is, not gonna lie, it can be grueling work. It's really tiring. It's always kind of feels like an uphill climb. But that's why we need more of us. We need a whole community to lean on and have that unified voice to say that this is policy that really works for us. So yeah, a little bit of action goes a long way. So however people can contribute, if this is, something that you're passionate enough about to listen to this podcast, and I definitely encourage you to get more involved in, not just IPS, but whatever your local community is. There's a lot of groups out there like mine that are grassroots and just like good people in the community trying to come together and make a difference. So I definitely encourage people to find the others in your area, and get involved and support these grassroots organizations, because we need that support if we want to keep going. And the longer this movement goes on, the bigger the players are that are going to want to get involved. And these grassroots organizations, serve a really big purpose in the bigger picture, and keeping the community engaged and a part of those really important conversations.
I
Mm.
would tell you what we haven't covered is the revenue benefit to the state. It's huge. And you know what, and I know Gene has numbers, but and you may have numbers too, Joe, what we project it could be. Here's the thing, we are always looking for ways to raise revenue. And as legislators and appropriators of taxpayer dollars, we definitely should stop looking at regressive taxes and use our government to help people where we can. And this is a service that will prevent regressive taxes from being imposed on taxpayers in Illinois that can actually generate revenue for the good of Illinois. So there's a big benefit as it relates to revenue generation for the state, not just licensing, but actually all of the facets of the business.
Hmm. That's really interesting. Um, are there any kind of projections that you've seen around this that people have tried to put
Yeah,
together?
I haven't seen any like clear research or numbers. There's been some comparisons to, what Oregon's market has been able to do and how many licenses they've been able to produce. And I was able to have a fascinating conversation with Angela Albee from the Oregon Health Authority, and she gave us some really great insight on what this has looked like for them in terms of, the economic impact on their state departments. Um, and obviously it's cost a chunk of money to get a program up and running, and they took that first mover's advantage for the rest of us, and have been figuring a lot out as they go, and in terms of staffing and what their needs are and what it means. But it's been really impressive what they've been able to do with a small team in the amount of time that they've been able to accomplish. And I think that they're nearing their cycles of being able to actually sustain their departments on their own just after the first 4 or 5 years of their program being online. So I think that that's really positive. And Illinois has a larger population, a larger GDP than Oregon. So I think that it can be expected that our market could be a little bit larger if you talk about it in those terms. There's a lot of different lenses to put on this. Um, and I definitely don't think that the way that we've drafted the Cure Act has been like a hugely, capital driven way to go about policy, but it is acknowledging the cost to regulate a program like this and what realistically we're asking for and what the needs are going to be for the state to be able to, provide a decent living for the staff that's going to work in those offices and deal with all of our public commentary on their work.
I do believe strongly, it's not recreational. So it's not going to be sold in a recreational way, but it's a business that will ultimately have a long term positive impact on Illinois' economy. And that's what this is all about, setting up a system that will positively impact the revenue streams for Illinois. Of course, like any business, there's always upfront costs, and we believe that it actually will generate those upfront costs and pay dividends along the way.
Yeah. There's some soft gains as well. I'm sure you've thought about this a little bit. One major benefit is getting people back to their lives. And people are often suffering very severely from assorted mental health disorders. And if they can get treated, if they can get their trauma cleaned up a little bit, and with the support of a program like this, they might actually be able to be better citizens, better family members, and there's long-term benefits to this. This flows into generations of benefit, and right now we're seeing like if somebody gets impacted by the war on drugs, it can impact the family economically, I think, for around 7 generations. So we need to do some work to clean that up. And this is a step in that direction.
So, Joe, you make a good point as you relates to the benefits socially. It is huge to understand how the business community will benefit from this. It will strengthen their workforce. And so we talked about law enforcement, but all of the businesses will benefit from making sure that their workforce has access to healing treatment. And so that is a social message that we have to socialize in this fight. Because the workforce is struggling. And it's not just
Yeah.
because of
Yeah. There's,
people
it's,
not making the wages that they
mhm.
need. People are struggling going to work every day because of their struggles with their mental and behavioral health. And the other part that I'm very, very passionate about is substance use disorder. This has been a strong, I think, from what I've read and from who I've discussed this with, this is a strong treatment for people that are struggling with heroin, opioid use disorder, or other substance uses.
I will
Mm,
say that's I'm glad you
absolutely.
brought that up because that's
And
another segment of our really key supporters in Illinois is the harm reduction community who are doing a lot of incredible work to try and lower the overdose rates, create safe consumption sites for people in Illinois, and Representative Ford has been the champion on that legislation too. We got House Bill 1, they got House Bill 2, so it's really because of his work of pushing to say, yes, these need to be priorities of the state because of the, countless lives that they impact and recognizing psychedelics as a potential, additional solution within the harm reduction space, I think has been, been really crucial to the success that we've been able to have and the people that we've been able to get behind us. So definitely shout out to those people who are really doing amazing work and who are in our coalition of supporters behind the Cure Act.
it's beautiful. All right. Well, I really want to thank you both for being here today and sharing about what's happening in Illinois. Um, I really, really think it's helpful to see that this is finally happening in a Midwestern state. And I think we can really see some development in your neighboring states. I think there's going to be some envy, and I think it's going to help them as well. So thank you for your leadership, both of you. Is there a website we could check out to learn more
Yes,
about this
definitely.
program?
You can go to illinoispsychedelic.org/cure act, and there's a FAQ, lots of different question and answers about psychedelic therapy, what this bill looks like. There's a link to the full text of the bill, and there's also a petition right at the top of that page. So if you are a supporter, you don't have to be from Illinois to sign this petition. So if you're in support of the work that we're doing, please sign it. It does help for our lawmakers in this upcoming veto session in November to see that our coalition is growing and the movement here is growing, and it helps them, feel that much more confident about getting behind the movement. So definitely sign the petition, and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date with the work that we're doing. At least once a month, sometimes more frequently, I send out a newsletter with updates on everything we've got going on and more opportunities to get involved. So definitely check that out.
That's fantastic. Well, yeah, thank you both again, and yeah, hope we can chat more in the future as things develop.